Well, good morning. There was a woman who heard that one of her favorite chefs was going to be the chief chef at this banquet. And so she got very excited about going to this banquet. And she got, the dress, the accessories, all that stuff. And as she was getting ready to leave for the banquet, on the night that it came, she gets a phone call from one of her good friends who's going through a crisis. So she did what any good friend would do, and that was she kind of helped talk her down off the ledge, spent some time with her until she felt better, but then she was running late for the banquet. So she gets to the banquet, it's in a beautiful banquet hall, beautiful decorations, and she sees a table with an empty chair at it, so she sits down and strikes up a conversation with the people at the table, and admiring the wonderful food that's in front of them. About 15 minutes goes by, and she's like, and she excuses herself from the table and finds this waiter who's bussing plates and stuff, and she says, I arrived late at the banquet. Can I get a meal? And he said, sure. He goes, just follow me. She's like, follow you? And then he comes to the doorway to an adjacent room, and he says, it's a buffet. Choose whatever you want. And she comes in, it's just amazing layout, just the many courses of the meal. And, so she has a chance to take it and go back and eat. And what I've noticed, I know early in my life, and maybe in your life too, that so many times we see the banquet, we just don't know where to get it. And each of us have been given special gifts, passions, and talents, and yet some of us have gotten a gift in our life which we have no clue on how to use. So, as Elliot mentioned, I'm going to start a 7-week series on prosperity today. If you're here for the first time, I know people always get a little leery when we start talking about money and about the Bible, but Unity takes a much different approach to it, as it has for close to 120 years now. But many people really love this series. I know I did this series in Indianapolis, when I was a minister there. And so if you want to invite friends to come in the coming weeks, and remember that we videotape video record. We don't use tape anymore. Video record, the service. It's at the bottom of our website. It's also on our Facebook page. The recording is restored there. And then, of course, we do have compact discs, so you can just go to the bookstore for out, just write up one of the request forms, and we'll have it for you the following week. But if we understand that we're already spiritual beings having a human experience, we have to grasp the concept that there are the facts about the world and then there's the truth about the world. Would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? We live in a world in which we are co-creators of what we experience. So if we're experiencing unpleasantness, we have an opportunity to change it. The facts might be right in front of us. We see things that are very unpleasant in whatever area of our life, but it doesn't mean it has to stay that way. And yet so many of us get caught up in just assuming this is the way it's always going to be. Unity has taught the prosperity principles for more than 100 years. In fact, in the middle of the Great Depression, Charles Fillmore worked on his book, Prosperity. Charles is one of the two founders of the Unity movement back in the 1880s. And he published in 1936 his book on prosperity. And there are a few Unity ministers who specialized in teaching prosperity. Catherine Ponder has written over a dozen books. We have her books in the bookstore. Edwin Gaines has traveled and has her book, spiritual. In fact, Edwin just learned a couple weeks ago is kind of retired. She was getting up there in age and didn't like to have to be traveling every week. But then, of course, there's this other couple that traveled all during the 90s doing the prosperity seminars, Bob Euler and Carla Golden. we came here in January of 1992 and did our prosperity workshop. Late Unity minister Stretton Smith came up with the 4T concept, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But that was a class that took 13 weeks. And then David Owen Ritz, another minister, came up with the Keys to the Kingdom, which is a 7-week program. So that's what I'm going to base this series on. That is the Keys to the Kingdom. And yes, we do have that book in the bookstore as well. Now, each year I try to offer a prosperity class because it changes lives. You know, healing and prosperity are the two things that are probably the most practical in applying our spiritual nature in this physical world. And Silent Unity is Unity's 24/7 prayer room. Back when Unity started there in the late 1880s, they would get together and have a prayer circle. And Myrtle Fillmore, Charles' wife, had healed herself completely from tuberculosis when she told she only had 6 months to live. And she lived until she was in her 80s. So, in looking at all of these, I'm sorry, I was talking about Silent Unity. So Silent Unity then kind of graduated into telephone when that came along, so people could call in with a prayer request. And then, of course, they continued doing the writing, and now we've got email, and we've got the app, the You Pray app, the letter You Pray. These are all ways you can do a prayer request, and it's, they're open 24/7 there, right outside of Kansas City. Now, let me clarify something, and that is that what we're not going to do is talk about the prosperity gospel. I know that it's become, there are certain televangelists that just like to say to you, all you need to do is to tithe. Just give 10% of your gross to me, and everything will be great. And of course, I remember in 2006, Kenneth Copeland making an appeal to his followers, his televangelist followers, to send in their money because both he and his wife needed new private jets. And of course, Creflo Dollar, back about 10 years ago, same sort of thing. Of course, he wanted a larger jet that they could take on missions over to Africa, but still, it's like, no, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about just is having all your needs met, your obligations fulfilled, and your desires demonstrated. Saying that all you need to do is tithe is like handing someone a trumpet and say, here's what you do. You blow in this end, you wiggle your fingers up and down on these valves, and everything sounds great. It's like, well, you'll get a sound, but it won't sound like the music you want to hear. So that is why I know some people in the New Thought movement and the Unity movement have started calling it abundance, because they didn't want to be tainted by the prosperity gospel. I tend to plant my flag and say, hey, wait a minute. No, we just need to explain what true, consistent, healthy prosperity is. But if you want to call it abundance, that's cool. I have no problem with that. So, full spectrum prosperity, the way Unity believes it, is for you to have good health, to have an occupation that you enjoy doing, to have relationships that are enriching, to have spiritual awareness that helps you become more fulfilled in your life. And then, of course, having enough money. Having the money to pay the bills, to have all your needs met, your obligations fulfilled, and your desires demonstrated. And when you do this, it leads to things like happiness, peace, love, fulfillment, unlimited possibilities. Now, let's get clear. It doesn't mean that you'll never have another challenge in your life. That is part of life. Sometimes we'll have a challenge, we'll get beyond it, oh, great. And then we want to live that fairy tale thing of, then I lived happily ever after. But what seems to happen is we progress in our spiritual awareness or consciousness, and then a new challenge comes along. But what I've found over time is that I'm much better suited to handle the challenges in my life. I used to, when I was doing the seminar, I said, joke that God is sneaky. He gets to you whatever way God needs to get to you. And of course, we don't believe that God is separate from us, but there's that sense that, boy, if something is going to get your attention, it's your money or your finances. So let's take a look at what all of the various spiritual masters have to say. Of course, all of the spiritual masters teach that this world is abundant. There's more than enough to go around of everything. Problem is, we come up with these crazy systems of hoarding things here or hoarding things there or putting things in storehouse here. It's like, no, it doesn't need to be that way. And we don't need to live our lives being in fear that there's not enough. So it's like being awakened from a dream. The dream certainly seems real, but then suddenly it's like, oh, wait a minute. I know when I had my spiritual awakening in January 1987, it's like, oh my God, I just spent the last 30 years of my life, I was 30 at the time, living from fear, being afraid of things. And I had an opportunity to reset, to start approaching life differently. And it was a slow process, but I got it done. In the Gospel of John, 10th chapter, 10th verse, Jesus says, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Buckminster Fuller, the futurist, in his book, his 1981 book, Critical Path, looked at the world's resources, the creative energy. He looked at the population of the world, which was 4 billion at the time, and he says, everyone in the world should be a billionaire. Now, you may be thinking, yeah, but Bob, there's like 7.5 billion people on the earth. It's like, okay, well, would you be satisfied with $500 million in your checking account? We have to kind of stretch our thinking as to what it is that, as Edwin used to put it, how much happiness I can stand. Let me read you from the Gospel of Luke, it's 12th chapter, 22nd verse. Jesus said, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you shall eat, nor about your body, what you shall put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them every day. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a day to the span of his life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They don't toil or spin fabrics. Yet I tell you, even King Solomon in all his glory was not dressed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into an oven, how much more will he clothe you, O man of little faith? And do you not seek what you are to eat, and do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be of anxious mind. For all the nations of the world seek these things, and your Father in heaven knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things shall be yours as well. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give alms, provide yourselves with purses that do not wear out, with a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, and where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will be your heart also. So, to paraphrase Jesus in one sentence, what are you worrying about? Why are you so worried? Whatever we focus on will expand. So if we're in fear that we don't have enough money, and we focus on the fact that we have this fear of no money, things start to get more complicated. If, on the other hand, we relax and say, okay, I'm going to trust and know that I'm going to get the proper ideas or have the proper circumstances in my life, that things are going to get better. The true nature of money is, as a society, over these thousands of years, we've come up with this system of monetary exchange so that we didn't have to barter for everything that we do. You know, we get this amount of which we earn, and then we can take it anywhere rather than just exchanging our services with one person. It's the attitude about the money. You know, it's like the Bible verse that people say that, money is the root of all evil. It's like, no, it says the worship of money is the root of all evil. So if you're making money first in your life, rather than spirituality or God, then you're going to have some problems. But what is your attitude about money? In your mind, do you have it set that, well, I only make X amount a week or an X amount a month, or I live on a fixed income? It's like, well, okay, who fixed it? It is possible through other channels for goods to come to you, those wonderful surprises that surface in our lives. So what I'd like you to do is consider, when you handle your money, are you in fear or are you expressing love? And in these coming weeks, I want you to just kind of set up and observe yourself that will catch you when your thoughts start running off in that direction, that there isn't enough. Or how is this going to happen? Or how is that going to happen? I learned an affirmation that I want to share with you right now. Whenever I find myself saying, well, how is this going to happen or how is that going to happen? I use the affirmation, how is none of my business? How is none of my business? There are certain things that I know that I can control, and the other stuff I just have to let go of. So, the Gospel of Mark, 10th chapter, 30th verse. Jesus says this. Oh, wait. The disciples, some of the disciples are getting worried. They're saying, Jesus, we're giving an awful lot of money from the community purse. We might run out. And Jesus says, don't worry. Those who place their trust in God will find that they will have a return 100-fold of anything they give away. So during these next 7 weeks, I want you to use the catalyst for prosperity, and that's the 4T concept. 4 words that begin with the letter T, and that's tithe of your time, your talent, and your treasure. Now, the word tithe actually means 10%, and there's something, it's like hard to explain, but by doing that, by giving 10% in various areas of your life, what you'll see is a growth of abundance and pleasantness in those areas of your life. So when they say tithe of your time, talent, and treasure, time is how much time do you focus on acknowledging that you're a spiritual being having a human experience? How much time do you spend nurturing that spiritual aspect of yourselves? If you're awake for 16 hours in the day, then 96 minutes is 10% of your time. So would you be willing to, either take a class or read, the book, maybe the Keys to the Kingdom book, or meditate, or podcast something that's spiritual? I mean, I've got all of these recordings that I listen to, like when I go to the gym to work out. So it's pretty easy to accumulate 96 minutes, over a day's time. Or maybe just taking a moment, just kind of sit for a few minutes and think of God as you know God to be. Your talent is, of course, you being able to do things in the physical world to help other people, make this world a better place. So, would you be willing, if you've got your typical 40-hour week, to volunteer 4 hours a week or do something nice for other people for 4 hours a week? Here again, you got 7 days to take care of that. I mean, a lot of people, of course, will volunteer here. We're always looking for people willing to help as a greeter or help in the kitchen on Potluck Sunday, the first Sunday of the month, or snacks and those sort of things. There are certain things that each of us do well. What do you do well? Or perhaps you want to take the other approach. It's like, well, there's a way that I would like to learn more about this or stretch myself in this particular area. And then, of course, the 4th T word is treasure. And yes, that does mean giving 10% of the gross to wherever you're getting your spiritual inspiration, individuals, groups. Hopefully, Unity of Tampa is one of the channels of spiritual growth in your life. Now, I have yet to meet a person who has not been anxious about starting to tithe. Yet, it occurred to me once when I was hearing somebody talking about sports agents. Of course, your entertainers and your professional athletes have these agents, and these agents actually charge like 33% of whatever's coming in as their fee. And so I thought to myself, wow, so I get to have God as my agent, and I'm just paying 10%. That sounds like a pretty big bargain to me. And he's got a lot more power than some of these other agents. But if I take that level of trust, that faith, believing that there is a God presence and that I'm a part of it, then I can tap into something that I didn't tap into before. God is my source, not my job, not my income, not my revenues, not my investments. God is my source. And regardless of what's happening out here in the physical world, I've got to believe in the fact that through one of these many channels, I will get the things that I need in these 5 areas of my life. So it's our attitude about giving, not giving out of fear or guilt or obligation. Even though a lot of us start with fear, but what happens is we'll go ahead and tithe, and then suddenly we see results, and suddenly I'm not fearful anymore. Now, these 5 areas of life, like I mentioned, health, occupation, relationships, spiritual awareness, and money. So in your health, How's your health? I mean, and not only the physical health, but what about your emotional and your mental health? I mean, there's stuff going on there. What about your occupation? Are you doing something you actually enjoy doing every day? Do you find that you're helping other people? Do you find you're making this world a better place through your occupation? What about your relationships? We, of course, have business relationships, community relationships, our neighbors and stuff like that. And then, of course, we've got our good friends. And then, of course, family. And then, of course, everybody wants to have that one special someone that you can have that true, intimate connection with. And then there's spiritual awareness. Just being willing to, contemplate God and being opening our mind to the divine mind so that we can be guided. Our intuition shows us the right way to go. And then, of course, money. Is there enough money to pay the bills? Is there enough money to step out in faith? So I often think of, where Jesus says, where two or more are gathered in my name, I am there amongst them. So if we as a group of, say, 50 people are all doing this at the same time, we not only will be raising our own individual consciousness, we'll raise the consciousness of unity of Tampa and of the world. So let me tell you my tithe story. Carla and I were kind of minding our own business in 1990, and we were going to Unity in Chicago at the time. And Carla had started her own business, so we were dependent on my income. And then Edwene Gaines, comes to town, does her prosperity seminar. And we're like, wow, this is great stuff. And we actually went to a retreat that Edwene used to hold, a one-week retreat, and learned all about the prosperity principles. But, trying to put these principles into motion, this tithing thing, it's very easy to rationalize not doing it. It's like, well, and I'm looking at my budget, I'm going over the numbers. It's like, well, once we take care of all of the bills and all that, there's only 7% of the income left over. And I know God doesn't want me to blow my budget. And then I thought to myself, well, how much are we giving to, say, like Unity and to places where we get spiritual food? And I figured out 3%. And the number 3 just jumped off the page at me because I just had my annual review at work, that one time a year where they tell you what they really think of you. Well, they actually were very happy with my performance, and so they were giving raises on a sliding scale, and they were very happy to give me a 3% raise that year. And suddenly, light kind of goes on over my head, and saying, okay. And I look at the numbers once again. Another week or two goes by, and I'm sitting there once again, thinking, okay, I got to get this started. And suddenly, this scene from a movie jumps into my head. A movie was out the year before in 1989. And Duncan, go ahead and put up the slide. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Now, how many of you have seen that movie? Okay. For those of you who haven't, Indiana Jones is actually a professor of archaeology and stuff at the University of Indiana. And in this particular episode, we meet his father, played by Sean Connery, but he's an adventurer archaeologist, so he's always trying to find, some of the great treasures of the world and bring back artifacts for museums and the like. Now, in this one, they're looking for the Holy Grail, because that has been the quest that Dad, played by Sean Connery, has wanted. And he's got this little journal in which he's written down all of the things that he's learned about it, and then there's these clues when you get to the place where the Holy Grail is stored. So as the movie's building to a climax, they get out in the middle of nowhere. There's this cave where they think the Holy Grail is stored. Now, as in so many of these movies, the bad guys get there first. Now, the bad guys, in this movie, it's the 1930s, so it's the Nazis. And the Nazis want the Holy Grail, because he who discovers the Holy Grail and drinks from it will have eternal life. So they get there ahead of time, but one of their guys, in this cave, there's this real skinny tunnel. And one of the guys goes into it, and all of a sudden his head comes flying out into the mouth of the cave. And they're like, ooh, this is, there's something dangerous down this tunnel. So Indy gets there with Dad, and like, well, Indy, we want you to go get the Holy Grail. And they say, oh, you got to be kidding me. But the head bad guy points his pistol at Dad's stomach and shoots Dad in the stomach. And here's Dad bleeding out. And he's like, well, if you get to the Holy Grail, it gives eternal life. It'll heal your dad. So Indy reluctantly enters into this very skinny tunnel, and he pulls out this little book that he's got of his dad's things. Okay, what do you do when you get to see the Holy Grail? There are 3 spiritual challenges. And he faces the first one, which is one of humility, and then the second one, the one of integrity, and then the third one, he's coming down the skinny tunnel, and he gets to the edge of this cliff that he can't even see the bottom of. Now, I've actually got this clip, so I'm going to have Duncan play the video for us, because he says, this is a leap of faith. And there I am sitting there with my checkbook saying, this is a leap of faith. Now, it's a little hard to see, but okay, there's the back of his fedora, and he's getting to the edge of this tunnel. All of a sudden, here's this cliff. And he's looking down, and he's looking across. There's a door on the other side. And he says, a man of God at this point will know it's time to take the leap of faith. And he will see that he's worthy of the. But he's like 100 feet, man, nobody can make this jump, he's saying, But he hears Dad yell, and they're saying, quick, he's getting worse. And so he's looking out up at this, and you can see he's breathing kind of heavily, but then he just kind of pauses.
It's a leap of faith.
It's a leap of faith.
You must be, boy.
And his dad is saying, you must believe. You must believe. And so he closes his eyes, takes a nice deep breath, relaxes, and follows his intuition. And he steps out. It lands on something solid. It turns out there's a walkway there, but when you stand in the doorway, it's an illusion. It looks like it's the bottom of the canyon. So he walks across the walkway. The only way he discovered it was by taking a leap of faith. And then he takes some sand and spills out on the walkway so the people who are following him can find their way. So there I am sitting with the checkbook. This comes into my mind. Okay, I'm going to step out in faith. I'm going to believe that giving away 10% of our income is going to lead to more abundance in our lives. That week they needed somebody to work overtime. I worked overtime and it covered the difference. Next week they needed somebody to work overtime. And once again, it covered the difference. The next week they needed somebody to work overtime. I said, God, working overtime is not quite what I had in mind. But I started thinking about, okay, I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood in Chicago, and my dad and all of the men in the neighborhood, if they needed more money, would work overtime. And so I let go of that. And then suddenly Carla's small business began to thrive. And I realized, wow, we're a unit. Yeah, I don't have to do this for myself. I just need to be something. I just need to be a spiritual being having a human experience. And so that's how Carla and I started to tithe. So Jesus said, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So what I need you to do is just decide, commit. As your spiritual coach, what I want to see is each one of you prosper in all 5 areas of your life. I want to see Unity of Tampa prosper in all of the areas of Unity of Tampa's existence. So let's get started. Last week I talked about the meaning of the word amen, and it's basically an oral contract. Yes, I am behind this. I am ready to do this. That's what I want you to get to. So, needs met, obligations fulfilled, desires demonstrated. Now, there is one thing I need to give you a fair warning of, and that is that whenever we step out, believing and having faith, things start to happen. What starts to happen is anything in my mind, my experience, my memories that is opposed to what it is that I want to accomplish is going to surface in my mind. So if I'm afraid about money, and like I said, growing up with a blue-collar dad, I had to face Okay, you have to work overtime to make more money. Well, no, you don't. You know, all of these things start to surface, and a lot of people, though, that'll happen, and they start getting scared. And it's like, no, this is your opportunity to, in your conscious mind, say, yes, that is BS. I'm not going to live my life that way anymore, and let it go. And then to start to know the truth. And so that's, like I said, first force, second force, third force. And the second force is in opposition, but then you get to the third force, and that's when you can really put it into overdrive. So in our bookstore, we have the book Keys to the Kingdom there, which is, like I said, is a 7-week course. You can kind of walk it through. There's also a compact disc album if you want to get that instead, or if you want to get both, that's fine. But now if you get over there and you think, oh, I don't know if I can afford this, I'm going to throw in a ringer, and that is right next to it is a shelf which says prosperity, and there are some of these other books, some of them, you know, which are cheaper maybe than the Keys to the Kingdom book, but at least will give you some of the information you need to know. But third, if you are sitting there thinking, well, I don't know if I could afford any book today, and yet you are ready in your own mind to truly make a commitment, what I'd like you to do is afterwards, when I'm out there in the reception line, come up to me and say, Bob, I'd really like you to donate me a book, or give me a book, and I will give you a book on prosperity, because I want to see each of you prosper. All right? All right, so Duncan, let's put up this week's takeaways. So we're going to live the 4T concept for 7 weeks, so through the end of March. Tithe of your time, talent, and treasure. Be willing to give 10% of your time, 96 minutes a day, to doing something kind for other people. Make this world a better place. Oh, I'm sorry. That's talent. Time is 96 minutes a day of just focusing on God, reading a spiritual book, doing something spiritual. A talent is 4 hours a week volunteering or just doing something kind for other people, making this world a better place. And then 10% of your treasure, being willing to give 10% of your gross income. And if you can't do it this week, okay, I'll give you another week. But like I said, it's one of the scariest things I ever had to do, but when I did, it changed my life. And it doesn't mean you have to become a Unity minister 30 years later. I just happened to do that. And then examine the 5 areas of your life: your health, your occupation, relationships, spiritual awareness, and money. Now, you are probably doing very well in at least one area, one of these 5 areas of your life, maybe more. But there are other areas where you're having a lack. And it's interesting how when we'd rather focus on the things that are going well rather than the things that aren't. Now, I did mention what you focus on expands, but what I want you to do is to take a look, though, at that area where you have lack and say, okay, I'm willing to let go of that and focus on the positive in that realm and go ahead and create it for myself. Remember the woman at the banquet and the story that I told at the very beginning. It's like, yeah, there is a huge banquet, and you just need to know where and how to get things going. Was it Auntie Mame that said, life is a banquet and most poor suckers are starving to death? So from the Gospel of Luke, closing Bible verse, fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And may you always be open to God's guidance and grace. Let's prepare for meditation.
Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true.